What are the forces, challenges, and ideas that define the 21st century? Conversations to understand the greatest figures and stories of today to create a better tomorrow. This is the 21st Talks podcast. Hello, all of you beautiful people. I hope all of you are having a fantastic day so far. It is Monday, October 11th, 2020. The world is kind of burning around us, but we're still staying strong. And I hope all of you guys are doing well, all things considered. What's the phrase that everyone's been using in business emails and school emails? It's like, hope you're staying well in this strange and uncertain time. Or something to that effect. But yeah, so today we're bringing brand spanking new podcast episode 3 of the 21st Talks podcast. Now, I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Dr. Lara Mani, who is associate researcher at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge, and she studies communication, how to communicate existential risks, the specific challenges, and more importantly, empirically backed routes to effective risk communication. Lara and I had the chance to talk about what some of the unique challenges of communicating existential risks are, as well as what are some of the empirically based and empirically backed effective routes to communication, how does it differ between different groups, and also this idea of stealth learning, of how to get people to learn things about existential risks without quite realizing that they're doing so. It was a really fun conversation. We touched on some really important pieces, and one of which was our discussion on the ethical imperative of ensuring that our funding for existential risk is actually being used effectively, which I thought was really fascinating because, of course, existential risk is looking at the biggest threats facing our world. There's a whole lot of potential for bad there, to say the absolute least. So, of course, as an academic discipline, it wants to maximize that money because, if you are an existential risk researcher, you're in the exact same boat as the rest of humanity, just with perhaps a little bit more emphasis of looking out beyond the bow of the ship towards the horizon a little bit more. And that can be scary, but it's made a little bit less scary the more we realize that there's a whole ton of people, really, really smart people like Dr. Lara Mani, Adrian Curie, as well as a whole host of other researchers at Caesar and other existential risk research groups that are working tirelessly to present us with data and facts on these risks and also mitigation plans, and also trying to understand how to communicate that to the public to create the most good and the most change. So anyways, I always feel like I'm leaving these discussions knowing not only more about existential risk and more about philosophy or psychology or, in this case, communication, but I also typically leave it feeling a little bit more optimistic about our future as a species, because existential risk fatalism it's a serious plight. It's hard to create change when people, for example, with climate change, people believe that it is just going to end our species. That doesn't really motivate action. That motivates despair. And I'm really fascinated on continuing to have these discussions to figure out, how we can use 21st century predicaments of the modern person, I should say, to help generate change both consciously, psychologically in ourselves, but also globally for the pursuit of, creating a better humanity and a better tomorrow. So nonetheless, without any further ado, here's Dr. Lara Mani and I's discussion on risk communication for episode 3 of the 21st Talks podcast with your host, Coleman Snell. That's me. And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. It really, really helps the podcast out. But thank you guys very, very much, and I'll see you guys next week. Well, hi, Lara. Thank you for coming on today.
No problem. Really looking forward to chatting with you.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. All situation considered.
Despite everything weird going on, I feel like that's the best answer we can kind of hope for right now. Speaking of which, so a lot of your studying and research has focused around risk communication. what it's like, what is it like living through a pandemic right now, and seeing how this very real thing is being communicated to the public?
It's such a unique situation. I feel I don't want to use the word lucky because we are living in a pandemic, but it's an amazing kind of time to be in this field and really see some like real action kind of things going on, and being able to sit back a little bit and not be right involved with it, and kind of understand what's working well, what's kind of not. It's really, really informing our science for sure.
Because I feel like it's just kind of encapsulated the importance of risk communication and effective risk communication. And like I can see why like being in the field itself, because from the a couple sort of risk focused individuals I've had the chance to talk to so far, it seems like every single one of them sees risk and existential risk as being in this sort of renaissance right now. Not just because the pandemic, kind of leading up to it, obviously, with the creation of all these different existential risk think tanks as well as research institutes. Like Stanford just got theirs last year through Berkeley's initiative, and it just seems like COVID has put even more accelerant into the gas tank, which is really, really fascinating to me.
Yeah, agreed. I hope the kind of pace and the momentum kind of keeps up, and the kind of interest in our field as a result of COVID, as that kind of hook for people to come in to join our field.
And hopefully actually shows people the importance of it, right? Because it's hard to, I feel like there's some larger issues here, but one of the difficulties specifically, and I'm really interested to ask you about the differences between communicating to the general public and to politicians, because right now the way our society is set up is we have to appeal to the interests of a very select group of the population, the politicians, to be able to actually convince change to happen. And that's kind of hard to do when you're talking about risks that are 8, 12, 16 years off. That's more time than a lot of these guys will still be in office. A lot of these people, I should say. So like, how do you what's the research when it comes to communicating differently to the general public versus politicians or corporate business leaders? Like, where's that? How does communication differ between those groups?
Yeah, so there's quite a wide kind of ranging difference between the two. When it comes to kind of public communications, what you're really trying to do is get the public to kind of embody what you're trying to say to them and really kind of take it on board, but in a way that's contextualized in which they can understand and use. So it's quite a lot of the communication around the general public is about persuasion and about getting your point across in a way that isn't conflicting with personal values. So it's a very delicate balance of being able to communicate effectively, but also in a way that doesn't assault already the kind of perceptions and kind of logic behind people's decisions and kind of their own thought processes. When it comes to the politicians, that kind of decision-making level, it's a kind of different balance. What as you've already kind of alluded to, these people aren't in position for a long time, and that means that we have like this unique challenge of trying to get them to do their utmost best within a really short amount of time. So, we'll be lucky if you can get somebody to engage with something. And if they do, their time is often not dedicated for a really long time. So it's about getting the point across really quickly in a language that's not too complex, because although they're in political and decision-making positions, it doesn't necessarily mean they understand our topic and what it all means. So it's about really getting that message across in a way that's quickly understood, but is also supported by the right evidence. It's also supported by the recommendations that we kind of want to see, the action that we want as a result of their kind of interaction with us. So we have these kind of two different methods of communication, which have inherent challenges in themselves. So, the general public can be quite difficult to persuade at times. Like, particularly if it's around contentious issues or something that feels so alien to their everyday life. You can imagine trying to talk to someone about a pandemic that originated from China maybe 5 years ago. And fine, we may have had like some of the kind of influences of swine flu and MERS and SARS, but I would imagine the communication would have been a lot more challenging, and people, because it's not a prescient risk, it's not something that immediately kind of influences their lives. It's much more difficult to get them to consider that as being something important. So yeah, there's definitely differences, and I think they are inherently different, like different worlds in themselves, different beasts. I'm really more towards I really enjoy the public communication more than I do the kind of um, the levels of policy
I can't
engagement.
imagine why. Just
Well, so I mean, one of the best things is that it opens up for a lot of fun and like the adoption of lots of different medias that we can kind of do to kind of increase that really engaging approach to kind of outreach and communication.
So this, I promise this little tangent's gonna be on topic. But I remember when I was younger, right? I was riddled with anxiety when it came to different big risks I felt like we were facing as a society. I remember like climate change, especially. Seventh grade, my seventh grade science teacher. We were coming home from a baseball game. I remember he was talking to me about climate change. I was just filled with terror. I was so afraid. And I don't know what happened psychologically. At some point in my adolescence, I was like, "Oh, this is actually really cool to study. This doesn't scare me as much anymore, apart from when I'm trying to go to sleep and the thoughts creep in." Um, but it's taking on a different form. There's a more lucidity when it comes to the ability to actually talk about these things without that fear setting in. But I recognize that's not true for everyone generally. So how, as a like when it comes to the ethics of risk communication, you're talking about things that are scary. In fact, the reason you're saying it is this might be devastating to you and things you hold dear. How do you make sure you're not onsetting hysteria when it comes to communicating to the general public? Where is the sort of golden mean between hysteria and apathy? Because it has to be somewhere in there. Is there like a nice little ratio there? Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd say that's the golden ticket. If you find that, and then I think you're doing really well. But you kind of make me think of this thing that perhaps rings true with many British youths, as where we were all terrified of acid rain. We were taught about acid rain at school and how it stripped trees of their branches and leaves. And if that there was always that one guy in the playground who was always trying to drink the rain, and we were all terrified he was going to burn his inside. But how quickly that kind of died. Yeah, so around this kind of morality and apathy, I think it's a really delicate balance. It's more about kind of getting people to understand the numbers, the figures, the science, but without actually being too confrontational of their own beliefs. So there's the classic example of saying like 97% of climate scientists say that climate change is real. And that's an easy one to communicate and is actually really well received because you're not asking people to change their assumptions that they believe climate change is real. You're asking them to accept that climate scientists are saying that climate change is real. And so it's around context and it's around always spinning things in a really positive way and making sure that it's not something that people want to disengage with. It's about making it really relevant to them, but also without assaulting their own beliefs. So it is a fine balance, and effective communication is an art, and sometimes you can do everything you think is effective and works really well, and it can actually not lead to anything. So I mean, we're still trying to unpick a lot of that and understand why certain things work and why certain things don't, but a lot of that comes to context and making sure you're communicating in a way that's contextualized and means something to that person. So you can talk to somebody about climate change and maybe they don't want to take that on board because they don't see how that affects their everyday life. But for example, if you start to engage them with more I'm trying to think of an example there. Maybe I had a really great
Oh, there's a little bit of. Oh, okay. I think we're back.
yeah. So yeah, around I'm not sure I cut out, but taking that ice block into the classroom and saying, look, here's actually an example of what climate change can do. It can melt ice and it can kind of change these environments. And it's about really embedding something within people and getting that emotional connection to what you're trying to communicate.
Recently I've seen beer. There's a beer company I forget the name of it, but they like market themselves as I think the first carbon neutral beer or something like that. And they're like, can you would you be able to pay $100 for a 6-pack of beer? With climate change, that's where we're headed. Really, really weird marketing. But when you're talking about things that people, especially all of Americans, hold really dear, I feel like there's some ins there that haven't exactly fully been taken a hold of yet. But I just thought that was the funniest example. um, so you were saying that it's contextualizing the pieces of knowledge that you're trying to communicate, right? What is the ultimate goal? Is the ultimate goal of effective communication to just get public awareness on the rise, or to spur public action? Or does it change for different communication projects?
Yeah, so like I am like a real advocate of understanding like evidence-based communication.
Hmm.
I don't just do things without actually understanding if they're impactful. And to me, that really varies from project to project. So my current role at CSER, the Centre for the Study of Existential Risk, is on a project called The Science of a Global Risk. And so my postdoc is all about trying to get that next step. We've got all this evidence about what existential risks are, what they look like, how they might impact us, but it's time to get action and start moving the conversation on to actually starting to mitigate and prevent against these actions. And so for me, obviously my mission there is action,
Hmm.
but there's definitely this kind of logic model progression through certain outcomes that lead to those impactful actions. So I think it's kind of in my thought process for this, it's all around understanding, first of all, who it is that we want to talk to about this and how we think what the kind of model for action looks like. Who do we actually want to be communicating to, and what do they want to hear? So where are they already? What are their acceptable levels of risk in terms of existential risk? Do they actually, they're actually fine, and we actually, even no matter what we do, will they ever change? Maybe that's the baseline. Maybe there's lots of room for change. It's all about understanding that first, and understanding these perceptions of risk. I think once you've kind of got that level, you can kind of start to tailor your messages and make sure that what you're communicating fits to the right audience. We've kind of already chatted about that with the policymakers and the public audience differences. And so then you can make sure the messages are trying, if you've already got your audience and you kind of understand what they want to know and how to say it to them, then, you know, logic says that if you then communicate that message in the right way, it should have some kind of effect. And that might be increased in knowledge. So actually, first of all, just starting to talk about existential risk and starting to actually think about it. And then the next step might be, from that increased knowledge, they actually want a bit more accountability. They want a bit more action towards it. So I mean, what that looks like could be very vast. It could be more towards activism. It could be just holding accountability for wrong, like, you know, like the things that aren't going right. Why aren't policymakers considering existential risk? Why aren't we thinking about long-termism in policymaking? So, I mean, that's the long kind of haul with the general public, perhaps. And then that kind of action level with policymakers is going to look a little bit different again. First of all, it's getting it onto their radar. How do we communicate to them in a way that makes global catastrophic risk and existential risk more important than anything else on their table? And there's a lot on their table.
Yeah,
How do we get
yeah.
it in a way that they think, yeah, it's time for us to take action with this? And maybe COVID is finally the hook. Maybe it is, and it's definitely a pedestal that we shouldn't kind of not use. Otherwise, I'm going right from the ground upwards. So I'm happy to have a step to help me. And maybe it's finally the conversation piece that gets people thinking. Actually, one, we should never have been in this situation. We knew the risks. Certainly in the UK, influenza pandemic has been on the top of the risk register for many years. We knew how to mitigate and prevent against it, but we didn't, and those systems failed. And there's something that, you know, this nice hook there to be able to say to policymakers and decision makers, well, it's time to never let this happen again, and actually make sure that you're taking action against what you're doing.
Yeah, and I feel like when it comes to the risks that could be the shock factor to wake people up. Yeah, because for a little while I was thinking, I remember back in 2016 when the west coast of the United States was hit with really catastrophic forest fires. For me at the time, I was like, oh, the smoke in the air, the smoke that's literally choking the lungs of all these people might be just enough to wake some of us up. And it certainly was for me, and I know some of my friends and people at my high school in the time. But it still wasn't enough for sort of a larger push towards taking care of a specific risk, climate change. So I feel like something that's interesting about COVID specifically is when it comes to the disasters, like the pandemics that we have faced in the past, the amount of deaths was so much higher than we're seeing currently with COVID. That's not to mitigate or minimize the number of the profound number of people who are dying and succumbing to it. But when it comes to a virus that has a death rate of roughly 2%, when we're looking at countries that are doing like really wide scale testing, like South Korea, it could have been a much more catastrophic pandemic. And the fact that this one is bad enough to wake a lot of people up, but not so bad that it just leaves us and our society sort of crumbled and falling. I feel like it's not necessarily lucky to say that we're in a pandemic, but I think it's a lot better than the alternative of having faced no risk whatsoever and just sort of laying open to climate change and not actually adjusting to it, right? So I feel like what I'm interested in seeing is how do people experiencing global risks today, or I guess a better way of framing is how do previous experiences, firsthand experiences, visceral experiences of something really bad happening, how does that shift people's receptiveness to communicating risk in the future? Because I think COVID, as terrible and horrible as it has been, I think might serve as that sort of gateway into people thinking, oh wow, the world is a dangerous place and we have to make sure we have experts who are paying and actually are well experienced to talk about these things.
Yeah, I think COVID definitely could have been a lot better, as well
Yeah,
as it could have
absolutely.
been a lot worse. And I
Absolutely.
think
Yeah.
a lot of my kind of thought around that is some of the things that have gone wrong are based around communication, and had we perhaps communicated more effectively or adopted the right methodologies to actually communicate that were well planned and well, kind of organized, maybe we could have saved more lives, and maybe that's actually the way that we should see it. And so I've forgotten the second part of your question, but I'm just going to lead it to it.
Does experiencing risk sort of
Yeah.
in some does it make communication more effective
Yeah,
or change it?
so absolutely. So first-hand experience of risk makes things absolutely more prescient in people's lives. But is also very complex. So there are
Yeah.
many populations and communities within the world that are exposed to more than one risk at any one time. And so within disaster risk, it is quite common to have people, for example, one of my regions of study for my PhD was in the Caribbean on the island of St. Vincent, where no matter how much we talk to them about volcanic risk, there's a volcano that sat there very quietly and has done for 36 years. In the meantime, every single year, hurricanes, earthquakes, flooding strike the island. And it's a very complex situation to understand how and when is it appropriate to communicate the right risk to people too.
Yeah.
So, of course, communicating around global catastrophic risk and existential risk is absolutely important. But at the same time, it's also very important to make sure we don't take away from communicating other important risks, like the balance of inequality is a risk
Yeah.
that will, and so, I mean, when we kind of talk around COVID, for me, there's many things, and I already kind of said that I think there's things in COVID that actually could have been better.
Yeah.
And could have saved more lives.
Mm-hmm.
And I could talk to you all afternoon. I'll try not to, but so, I mean, we've seen some really amazing examples of countries that have done really well, and you alluded to South Korea and their excellent testing, and that was absolutely participatory and absolutely bought in by the residents of South Korea. They actually wanted and approved of the government plans, so it had a lot of success. In terms of communication, New Zealand has to be right up there with their excellent alert level system. It worked super efficiently. I mean, Jacinda Ardern is just incredible anyway, but for her to be very clear from right on the outset this is what this means, and this is what it means for you. It was an excellent example, really well executed, and still is being executed. And the numbers
Adrian and I
speak for
talked
themselves.
about that. Yeah.
She's just so fantastic, and she really did do a good job. And as much as I don't want to admit it, but the UK government also did some excellent things too. A lot, my eyes have been on Europe and the UK. And so, they did really excellent in the beginning of the pandemic with their washing the hands, I don't want to call it a bit, but their communication about how the importance of washing hands and using the happy birthday song. And, we actually started to see societal change, and people were actually making sure they were washing their hands, and they were actually adopting behavioral change, which is the sign of effective communication.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it went down from there, and there's many, many other different kind of failures and things that kind of led on. So, I mean, yeah, it's super important to communicate really effectively when it comes to these risks that are prescient in our daily lives. And right now, we're in the middle of a public health crisis.
Yeah.
And it's important to make sure that we prioritize what's important to your average Joe as well. So, yeah, I can't deny it's really tricky.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see why. And earlier with my point, I was again not trying to minimize the serious impact that COVID-19 has had. It was only to illustrate that I feel when it comes to disasters that have an impact, I suspect that there's some correlation between people actually taking up arms and saying, wow, we really have to make sure that we're, fighting these plights of humanity in all their forms. And people collectively experiencing some level of trauma together as a society. And
I mean,
feel like when it comes to
kind of,
risks that,
yeah, I kind of agree with that, but I kind of want to push you back because
okay,
as much as that kind of like feels how that is right now, I wonder how long it will last. And
that's
I guess
a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that people felt really motivated and really upset about what coronavirus had done to their own communities, and it hit really on a local level. It's incredible. But this isn't the first time we've hit up against something like this. We've had, other incidents in the past, like swine flu, MERS, SARS, in terms of just public health crises, and it's very quickly forgotten and fades into the background.
So
it's really about keeping that conversation alive.
Well, then how do you sustainably actually is it just like continuing to push public communication programs? Is it putting programs in schools? Like when it comes to the best blueprint, or I shouldn't say best, but when it comes to a blueprint for actually sustainably reminding people that we need people who are interested in these risks to make sure that future generations as well as this generation don't have, we don't have 10 COVIDs happen over the next century, or we don't have disasters on the scale of something that we can't even imagine right now within the public sphere. Like, how do you continue that conversation going on? Are there some countries that have done it really, really effectively and have taken a past disaster and been able to sort of through that experience communicate over a very long period of time to kind of keep up that public memory of the event?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're getting better at for sure. And within my kind of volcanic risk communication circles, like I've definitely seen some excellent examples. And, there's recent projects that I've seen within the volcanic risk where it's about keeping that legacy alive and getting people to talk about what happened to them for that new generation to hear the same stories. It's really much more powerful to hear the stories from people that are in close contact with you. So whether it's your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation, that's not that far removed. And it actually means something a lot more. So, I mean, some of the examples I've kind of seen of that is lots of it's all about creative media and using these creative medias to keep these kind of conversations going. So a lot of the examples I've seen are around film and documentaries. And there was this excellent project within the UK called STREBA, Strengthening the Resilience of Volcanic Areas. And they adopted lots of storytelling and films in South America and within the Caribbean region of communities telling their stories. So, it doesn't sound that long ago, an eruption in St. Vincent in 1979. But it's an entire generation in that time, if not two, who had no experience or any perception of what that means and what that feels like to live through that kind of experience. So it's really important to share that in a way that is emotive. Emotion is one of the biggest ways and the most effective methods of communication. If you can instill emotion in people, it absolutely brings about change. So one of the examples for me, which was extremely powerful during my PhD, was I used video games as a communication tool. And we took this video game to a community on St. Vincent, and I played it with these local community members who had survived the 1979 eruption, living very close to the flanks. And they began to tell their stories in incredible, vivid descriptions, highly emotive, talking about how they felt and how the heat was. And it was just incredible, this regurgitation of this story in such incredible detail. And if you think about your own life and you think about the events you remember most clearly, it's because they're incredibly emotive. So a lot of around communication is if you can successfully make an experience quite emotive and quite like effective to somebody's kind of personal experience, then you're likely going to have an effect. So
I'm incredibly happy that it sounds like it's not, a collective public experience of some really unfortunate event spurs additional action. If anything, it's the ability to take past events and actually communicate those stories effectively and say, no, this is what that thing was like. That can be equally as effective. Which, I mean, obviously puts us in a place now where we're more so a global society than we have ever been before, where we can and it obviously has some ethical considerations of, you don't want to exploit individuals who have experienced something traumatic in order to convince other people to, have a change of heart, have a change of action. But from a risk communication perspective, it seems like, a volcanic eruption in this part of the world, let's just take like the Mount St. Helens eruption of, I think, the late 70s.
1980.
1980? Oh, okay. I was gonna say 79. That makes me, which is, something both my parents have lived through, right? Those stories directly contributed to how I perceived the risk of Mount Rainier, which is, right outside my window. It's these sort of stories of that you were saying that have an emotive response that actually create community memory, and it
Yeah.
strengthens the sort of rubber bands of our abilities to like bounce back and actually say, oh wow, like we definitely need to take action.
Yeah, storytelling
Yeah.
is incredibly, the use of storytelling and narratives is incredibly like strong for this kind of thing. And like we've seen some even more recent ones that perhaps we can kind of, I mean, again, I talk from that kind of UK perspective, but one of the biggest success stories we probably had there is with the BBC's documentary on Planet Earth, narrated by the legend David Attenborough, who talks so vividly and has these images of plastic pollution, the classic turtle with a straw up his nose. It's incredibly emotive. Like, we really love turtles. They're really lovely looking, and we love everything. They're in Finding Nemo. Popular culture, it's there. So we care. And so, somebody like David Attenborough, who's so respected and so trusted in everything that he does, telling us this, showing us the images that are really shocking and emotive, we want action. And that's seeing a massive surge of action towards plastic pollution in our oceans, which is really exciting. On the other hand, you have many other prescient risks that maybe aren't so sexy, or I don't want to call a turtle with a straw off his nose sexy, but they're maybe not so visual. And so we don't do so much about them. And an example of that, for example, is persistent pollutants in our ocean. We find PCBs at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of our ocean. But yet, because we can't see them and it doesn't appeal to our kind of emotions, we don't do anything about it. And that's kind of translates again to COVID and that invisible virus.
So it seems like for some risks, because one of the other things I was really interested in talking to you about is the challenges for different risks when it comes to effectively communicating them. And it sounds like the ability to actually emote or elicit to elicit intense emotional reactions, whether it's through like cinematography or a really great podcast or something about some way of communicating in a very human form. It sounds like some risks, because we can't see them, much more difficult to actually have an emotional connection to. And I think what I find, what I would really like to ask you about then is earlier you were talking about rational appeals, right, and making rational arguments as a way to effectively communicate. Does the rationality precede the emotion, or does the emotion get the person interested to see the irrational, or is it, just kind of a mesh of the two together? Because I feel like when it comes to climate science communication, I know Bill Nye has talked about this extensively, the way that a lot of climate scientists have been doing it for decades, not to say they weren't up against a massive pushback from US politics as well, politics globally, and a whole lot of dirty money. But nonetheless, a lot of that communication was, here are the stats, and that wasn't convincing to people. There was something else happening there. There was some emotion overriding that rational agency. So I want to know, if if the emotional leads to rational, or if you use the sort of two interchangeably at times, like what's the connection between rationality and actually convincing people?
So, I mean, it's very difficult to communicate to someone that doesn't want to know. So, um, there's always an element of people that are interested in the subject and getting them through the door, then exposing them to that emotion, then getting them to kind of make change. For sure, I can definitely see that's essential. But how many of us really cared about plastic pollution in the oceans before we watched turtles and birds with things around their neck? And the answer is I think, two-way. I think if we can expose people to the right messages in a way that appeals to them and that they want to learn more, they want to understand, they want to talk about it, we just have to have this hook that pulls somebody in all the time. And so, I mean, it's tricky because especially in global catastrophic risk and existential risk, people don't want to talk about the end of humanity. It's not a brilliant subject. I've been at many parties when they get asked what I do, I say this, and it's a conversation stopper. People don't want to talk about it. So it's about making it sound a little less intense, and it definitely spikes interest, and people say to me, "Oh, the end of humanity." That's it's sometimes the first time that they think about it. So yeah, I'm still learning on this and understanding what is the best way to get people their interest peaked, and like you say, with an ethical element of not trying to get them to panic or worry. And I mean, so far I haven't seen anyone panic or worry, but maybe that will
Instantly
happen.
ices over the social interaction. That's so funny. That's for a long time as a perspective person, existential risk researcher. Hopefully one day, I've oftentimes thought about how I'm going to tell people that that's what I do at dinner parties.
It's awful.
But as a risk communicator, I feel like you're equipped the best out of any existential risk researchers to communicate that effectively. So I was I was gonna ask you, what is it about risk communication specifically that sort of interests you initially? I know a lot of your work early on was volcanic eruption communication.
Yeah.
Can you talk like how did you get into this whole thing?
Yeah, so I'm probably one of your more unusual existential risk folk. I'm a geologist by training. That's absolutely where I come from. An applied geologist, so geotechnical engineering, engineering geology. But I always had that passion for volcanology, and I kind of, through my undergraduate, studied geological hazards as a kind of top level. And then afterwards, went off to work in industry and kind of knew that I just wanted to have I wanted to give more, I wanted to do more, I wanted to have an impact in this world. I didn't just want to walk through and not have made change. So I went off to study volcanology specifically, and that's when I started really falling in love with the communication side. I was really lucky to have excellent people around me that kind of work in these fields, and eventually kind of led to my PhD, which was down in Plymouth in the southwest of the UK. And yeah, I was kind of surrounded by this new environment that I had never really considered, that kind of human element of volcanic risk. And actually, this started to really make sense to me. And like, what is the point in doing all of this stuff that we do if it doesn't go anywhere, if people don't understand it, if it doesn't change people's lives? To me, it just kind of logically doesn't make sense. So yeah, my PhD was all around using video games to educate about volcanic risk in an engaging and motivating way, so that maybe children in the future, when that volcano eventually erupts, might think, oh, do you know what? I actually remember some of this stuff from this game I played, and actually know what to do and take action. So and for me, it was all about understanding actually if that works. There's lots of people within disaster risk that are pouring money into the use of games and use of all these engaging medias and tech that actually have very little evidence for its use. And for me, there's some kind of like moral viewpoint that, sometimes these children may only engage in this education once in their life, in their school career. And we have this moral obligation to make sure that what we do works. This could be the difference between saving someone's life and not. And so I'm always banging the drum for evidence-based approaches, and kind of, for me, like, no matter how far down the road you are, it's never too late to understand the impact of what you do. And so, yeah, this kind of led to Caesar. I kind of came out the back of my PhD a bit unique in my field as someone that was highly interdisciplinary, kind of this crossover between social science, evaluation, and like, quantitative, qualitative techniques, and physical geology and volcanology. So, yeah, I then kind of happened upon Caesar and its existential risk, which was totally new to me, and something I had never considered or fully understood. And so was instantly excited, and just I kind of saw my postdoc advertised, and I felt like I'd finally found somebody that understood where I'd come from all this time. So I was super excited to join Caesar at the beginning of this year, and I'm super excited for what we're going to be doing, kind of understanding how best to communicate existential risk and global catastrophic risk in a way that leads to impact, and kind of developing
So
these tools
cool.
and methodologies for everybody else to use. And, let's just stop making things up and saying that, just assuming that things work, and actually doing things that actually work.
It sounds like a lot of your reason for getting to it was that moment in your career where you said, I want to make sure what I'm doing is sorry. I want to make sure what I'm doing is actually going to have an impact, that this world's going to be slightly changed by the time I leave it. And I feel like that's true for so many different people who study existential risk, because there's this sort of central tendency of human beings to really be driven by a sense of meaning, right? Viktor Frankl in the 1940s, after surviving Auschwitz, wrote extensively about that in his logotherapy therapy, his book on logotherapy. And personally, I feel like it's a very inspiring message about humanity for me personally that's informed this project as a whole in a lot of ways, but has also sort of colored how I understand my own understanding of risk communication. So I would really like to hear your thoughts on what you see the connection between a sense of personal meaning involved in something and actually taking action in that field. Because I don't think people will do very much if they don't think it's meaningful in some capacity, or if it won't bring them a lot of wealth. And it seems like with existential risk, since we need so many people working on so many different layers of society to take
Mm-hmm.
care of these different risks, even just climate change is going to require people and on like every single level of society to have focused, attentive action. I don't see any way of doing that without somehow involving people's sense of personal meaning from the get-go in that process.
Yeah, I think I guess I would call it intrinsic motivation, and without intrinsic motivation, you will never lead to action. But we're still kind of thinking about how we can kind of start down this road and
Mm.
using extrinsic motivations to kind of encourage the intrinsic.
Oh
So
yeah.
there's some really great examples of this within climate change, and I'm going to use some really rubbish examples that I can't fully kind of explain, but there's this brilliant one from the US where I think it was one of the universities, like I can't tell you which one, but it was a brilliant case where they got the kind of the, and again I'm going to use colleges, but I mean that's what we'd use in the UK, to reduce their carbon emissions. And so they did it as a competition, and they then published it all online, and they were in competition with each other. So it started as an extrinsic motivation, like if you guys start to reduce your carbon emissions, then there's an incentive, which will be, X amount of money. And then what started to happen is they started to get in competition with each other, and they wanted to win, and they wanted to be the ones at the top. So they were cutting and cutting and cutting their carbon until great, the carbon's really dropped, and we're really having impact, and we're really making progress, and it's actually become an intrinsic motivation. They actually want to do it for themselves instead of being a force on the outlet, an external force forcing them to. It becomes a thing that they just adopt. So yeah, it's pretty difficult. And yeah, how this looks for my kind of research going forward is I don't know. If I'm honest, I'm still early days, but I'm super excited to kind of explore this link between the extrinsic motivations leading into intrinsic, and that kind of
Yeah,
advancement
that
from,
process.
yeah, so
Yeah.
increased knowledge, hopefully increased intrinsic motivation leads to action, right? That's how the model looks in my head, and I'd love to prove it.
Which comes down to identifying the specific factors within individual risk assessment, right? Because there's a whole lot of information on how individuals assess risk, whether it's getting into your car and deciding to drive,
Yeah.
versus if, wow, what's the example used in Bolstrom's book? Oh, he uses the example of the if you take the risk of someone getting to a car and driving, about 1 in every 600 hours of driving, there will be a serious accident. But if you put one every 600 boxes of cereal you eat, a little bit of poison, people aren't going to eat cereal. It comes down to people's assessment of their own willingness to do something, and if the risk is something that they're taking on board themselves. But this point's only to illustrate that there's a whole lot of complexities when it comes to how individuals actually assess the realistic risk that something is actually posing to them.
Yeah, that kind of level of acceptable risk and translating that to your everyday life is absolutely essential. There's some work that's been done at Cambridge a little bit using the use of risk ladders, and it's really common in medical practice. And like when you're explaining to patients about the risk of death from a certain surgery or the risk of side effects from undergoing a treatment, and it's actually like it's really commonly used there, and it works really, really well. People go and have surgery, they understand the risks. So absolutely, again, it's about like translating that and using figures in a way that people understand, and kind of, really thinking it through. I mean, there are some examples of failure of that. So, that classic 1 in 100 risk of a flood event, which we commonly use in the UK, which people just think there's only going to be one flood in 100 years. And it's not. It links more to the scale and the magnitude of the event rather than the frequency. So, it's really careful balance of how to deal with that.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Shifting subjects just a little bit, bringing it back to COVID-19 specifically.
Yeah.
We see a lot of underserved communities, not necessarily responding to public communication, as well as other ones. And I feel like a lot of it has to come back to the root of what makes someone an effective communicator, which oftentimes is a sense of ethos, a sense of authority, the sense of trust in the authority, right? And I feel like just given the national trends in the U.S. over the last 40 years, the public has become much more skeptical of people in power. Rightly so in a lot of cases. And I feel like that's going to do a serious number on people's ability to listen to the CDC or the World Health Organization, actually like hear what they have to say about this novel disease, and as well as was other sources of information in future disasters.
Yeah, I mean, so trust is, it's that buzzword. It's absolutely essential for, I mean, I keep saying that. There's many things that are essential for effective communication. And trust is one of those. If what you're communicating comes from somebody that people don't trust, what does it matter? People don't care. And quite often the trust in scientists is quite high. And in COVID, it definitely seems that people have more trust in science than they do in political figures. In terms of trust, it's not impossible to build. And so even where governments have failed, and obviously we're looking at the US government as having some incidents of particular trust. And, trust is quite simply built if you're honest and open and transparent. So, by saying to people, this is an unknown situation that we're currently living through. This is what we know, and this is what we need you to do. Unfortunately, we don't know this. And that's what, but we're taking steps to understand why we don't know this, and making, the kind of building the knowledge base of our understanding to be able to communicate more efficiently. But actually, it's about acknowledging those things that we do and we don't know, and being really transparent and open with your audience. The more you do that, the better it is. And, we saw examples of this, that there was lots of doubt and there was lots of speculation about what the government was kind of communicating, until the SAGE committee published all of their scientific evidence. And they kept saying, we're supported by the science, we're supported by the science. And then, the evidence was there. We could see what was based on science and what wasn't. And, we were much better able to critique what was coming from the government.
Because of that transparency.
Yeah, until we have all those plates on the table, it's really difficult to understand. So this is, again, why Jacinda Ardern did just a brilliant job. She was really open and honest straight from the get-go, and just said, this is the situation, this is what we need you to do, this is what we don't know, and this is what we're trying to find out, and look at the results. Unfortunately, the kind of success or failure rate is in death and case numbers, but we are seeing massive differences in the way that governments have kind of taken that on. But so trust is super, super important for that kind of buy-in from the communications that you do. That what's the point in doing all the hard work of understanding your audience, developing those messages, if they don't trust you?
as well as having the
Well,
right figures to actually communicate those. Because I know in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, when the Ebola crisis was happening like half a decade ago, there was a massive issue where the officials from the World Health Organization couldn't convince people to actually take the measures they needed, and it's because there was a lot of rumors going on that these groups of people are actually spreading the virus. They're actually trying to but what it took was it took leaders in the communities themselves who had the network and had
yeah,
the trust in the World Health Organization to actually
yeah,
go, okay, we'll communicate this ourselves. So they had people on the ground who were
yeah,
from those communities, and that was so much more effective. And I feel like something similar is obviously the vaccine discussion in the U.S. right now is really, really complicated given the very short time crunch that's being produced on. But if a vaccine is produced in the like before the Trump presidency is over, uh, it seems like there's a lot of people on the American right wing who would be much more willing to get the vaccine if Donald Trump said, "Hey, you guys should get this vaccine. I helped to develop it."
yeah.
Versus if it was a Democrat in the spring, if Joe Biden was like, "Oh, we have this vaccine out," and I feel like that creates a situation where societies that are more polarized, that have just trust split down right down the middle, uh,
Mm.
it creates a much more tenuous situation for risk communication. And I'm worried when it comes to being able to effectively communicate these things in the coming decades to these polarized countries, which the U.S. unfortunately is at the top of the list of, right?
Yeah, but I think you like raise a really, really important point there, and that is the use of local level communications,
Hmm.
and using those trusted people in society, and like we're seeing some really excellent like examples of that within disaster risk all around the world where that's adopted. And even in my own studies, like we quite often have used local leaders, and that's quite often how you get the buy-in and the participation. And it's about having that kind of two-way dialogue and not just it always being a one-way down. It's about having like the localized voice in it too. And like that, I cannot like tell you how important it is to have the voice coming from that communication being absolutely someone that is trusted, respected, and somebody that's confident in what they're kind of able to do. And like it's really a foundation of kind of science communication.
That's so fascinating. The local level communication being sort of helping to override the sort of larger political trends, which I feel like a lot of times we focus on. I'm definitely at fault for focusing on sort of the larger trends instead of the actual one-on-one human interactions, right? And I feel like a perfect example of this that is actually quite recent is I was talking to a doctor who is a doctor in a rural Washington town. Probably 60 to 70% of his patients are anti-maskers, are very, very heavy Trump supporters. He isn't, but he kind of has the look, even though
Yeah,
he's very left wing. He has a big old beard. He hunts. He like, has a slight draw. Like he looks the look, right?
yeah,
But his patients will come in, they'll take off their mask. He's in an N95, fully like suited up, and they'll be like, "Man, this pandemic's a total hoax, isn't it?" And he has to take a moment, not where he's like, all right, I'm gonna school you on all the larger stats, but he'll say, I've had 3 patients die from this. Like
yeah,
there are like so and so in your community, he
yeah,
died from this disease, and
yeah,
that is what he has found to be the most effective, is tying it back to the emotional rooting of people's actual individual communities, not this larger superfluous community that we
yeah.
are all logically connected to, but the actual human to human interactions. And it seems like effective risk communication comes down to communicating the human in every single one of these risks. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
Yes, yeah, I kind of agree. And like I think, yeah, I mean, it can't always come from that kind of top umbrella. There
Hmm.
are people that know communities. And so, some of the biggest things that have really kind of ground my gears since the beginning of the kind of pandemic in terms of communication, I'm dying to get this in, is the kind of lack of thought around accessibility of information as well. So it's not just about the people that are communicating it, getting the messages and understanding how. It's also about making sure that it's accessible to the people you actually want to communicate it to.
Yeah.
So in terms of accessibility, I've seen some massive failures on this. One of the examples would be in Australia, in Victoria, where the latest outbreak is as a result of governments failing to translate vital information for minority communities, and that is for the Vietnamese community. And then I've also seen this in cases in the UK, where actually particularly in the very crucial early stages of the pandemic, nothing was communicated, nothing was translated, nothing was made available for visually impaired. There's so many failings in terms of this, just really simple things like in the press briefings for the English government. So in the UK, we have obviously Scotland, Wales, but in England, so Scotland and Wales did excellent, and Northern Ireland, there was no British sign language translator. Just, I mean, it's such a fundamental.
Wow.
It's just really, and I worry that this obviously leads to the marginalization of minority communities, potential prejudice and discrimination, and it's such a simple, easy thing to solve and make sure that you do. And there are lots of people that do that, but even just really simple things like the testing centres in the UK, you could, if there was ever testing available, you were able to book a slot and go and kind of have it done, but it was only for car drivers. Not everyone drives cars, particularly in Cambridge where we're based. Everyone cycles, but you weren't allowed to go to a test centre. And just like, well, what? You're just marginalising parts of society because you don't have an understanding. It's naivety. I don't want to call it laziness, but it is. It's complacency on just these real fundamentals, and because of that, people are suffering. There's the lack of visually impaired information, or for there's over 300,000 visually impaired in the UK who are just isolated from information because it's not provided to them.
That's absolutely ridiculous. And I feel like, I mean, given the larger lessons from history of when disasters strike, people typically marginalize previously marginalized groups even more, is that just seems like something we can't continue to do in any of these disasters. So definitely, thank you very, very much for bringing that up. Again, shifting gears a little bit, to human difficulties of human dispositions and human tendencies when it comes to perceiving risks. How does risk communication try to contend with the fact that as individuals, oftentimes we try to insulate ourselves from the larger problems? I feel like oftentimes there's sort of a divide between me versus this problem, or me versus the outside world, which I think has kind of been illustrated with climate change a lot, right? And that division there is oftentimes communicated through time. So through saying, oh, climate change is a thing that will happen, it kind of stunts a lot of action against it because it doesn't have the same immediacy as saying the forest fires that are currently clogging up the air outside my window. That's a direct result of climate change. So I feel like oftentimes it comes down to sort of a time variable in how we talk about that. Is that fair to say from your understanding?
Yeah, I'd say it is. It's I've kind of lost my thought process there. I was kind of like, it is, but I think there's also I'm really sorry. Are we able to pause there? My dog is playing a squeaky duck behind me. So yeah, for sure, there's definitely things around like that making it really contextualized, bringing it right into them, and kind of showing them directly what it means in terms of their situation and their kind of being.
So a lot of times it comes down to communicating the external incentives as well as trying to shoehorn, not necessarily shoehorn, but as well as possible actually highlighting the individual, not necessarily individual responsibility, but the individual impact that these things will have, which I feel like is kind of translating the global into the personal, right? Which I think is something that collectively as a society, at least in the US, it's the only time I really see that being done, at least the most commonly, is in like formal news programs where there's an increase in crime, even though crime has been on the decline for the last like 20 years in the US. There's like an increase in crime in this area, and like that, and it's that fear, that sensational fear that a lot of like different news programs kind of bank on for profits. I feel like that's one of the only times where I see the larger trends of society being translated into personal impact.
I think really key is like a lot of what we are exposed to comes from our media, and the way they like censor, well, they don't censor, but they pick and choose what they want to show us because it's emotive. You know, seeing all the koalas that got burnt in Australia is really, really emotive, and we're really upset about it. But
Yeah.
yet, how much action actually spurred from that, and how much, you know, there was a lot of anger around it, and you know, however many billion animals died, but nothing happened. Like, we're still just having this conversation about whether climate change exists or not. And, you know, even in the last day or two, with Trump coming out and saying that scientists don't know anything about climate change, and it's all political and it's all just to sell newspapers. And actually, these conversations have moved on massively, and we're not having that debate anymore. We're actually now talking about all of the drivers and understanding how to deal with that and getting action towards these things. But it's just constantly the way that we're told to think about things.
Yeah,
It's very powerful.
yeah, total reframing of the discussion, I feel like, is one of the first steps we can actually have to spurring a different response, right? Because I feel like for too long in the U.S. climate discussion has been centered around, you know, having one person on one side of the table who's a climate denier and one person on the other side of the table who's a climate scientist. And the way that that is just set up visually kind of creates a 50 versus 50, you know, odds, which is not representative, and it's totally inaccurate framing. Whereas, you know, obviously the discussion we should have been having was, how can we take effective action? And I feel like when it comes to risks generally, a lot of that sort of disheveling and sort of disjointment of the conversation comes from bad actors. You know, there's a lot of individuals who are like, well, for this reason or that reason, this specific risk, I want to, you know, actually act like it's not a thing, and I personally believe it's not a thing because of these incentives. And we leave it up to a lot of free market communicators to be able, you know, whether it's the news or another source, to frame these discussions from the get-go. And that creates bad incentives. That creates a way of not actually being able to facilitate the conversations we need to have. How do you guys how do risk communicators deal with nuance in these problems? Because it's difficult to, you know, obviously all these global issues are incredibly complex, and imprecision of many risk assessments by experts might make the effective communication actually really challenging. It might, yeah. I just feel like that you have to sort of strike a balance between precision and imprecision when it comes to being able to actually effectively communicate these things.
Yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, one of the biggest problems with communicating climate change is the absolute uncertainty that's absolutely inherent with all of the kind of science that we do. And again, that kind of translates into global catastrophic risk and existential risk, of course, of which we consider climate change. So, I mean, communicating uncertainty is a whole kettle of fish, and you know, it's absolutely about the nuance. There's some of those things we've kind of already talked about being really transparent and saying like, this is the extent of what we know, and this is, you know, this is why we need to kind of do about this. But actually, there is this inherent like improbability within the models, and we have to kind of take that into account. But it's a fine balance between communicating those things that we don't know and also talking too much, spreading too much information, and trying to include too much. There's a really fine balance between trying to communicate in a way that's correct, but actually communicating the right content and the right amount of information. And this is something within climate science we've seen a lot, where the kind of balance between what we are kind of communicating isn't the whole picture, and that's often where the critique comes, and the kind of the nitpicking about the climate science, because it's seen as a vulnerability rather than an advantage in the way in which we're communicating to actually see positive action. So it is very really challenging, and it's still something we're still experimenting with and kind of trying to learn. And it's something I'm really keen to kind of look at, kind of understanding how to do this with global catastrophic risk.
Oh, that's so fascinating. Yeah, I'm really really psyched with what work you'll be doing in the future. I'm really excited to actually read up on it. And then as the last question before we move into the sort of rapid fire question section, uh, what are some of the major ethical considerations of risk communication? I know we talked about potentially leaving out marginalized communities who might not trust or might not have the ability to interpret messages in certain ways. Are there any other major ethical concerns?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously one of the biggest challenges for me in my PhD was kind of taking a video game to communities of children that showed their volcano in eruption and saying like, this is what might happen to you. And of course, that's quite terrifying and could be quite psychologically damaging. Of course, we didn't quite package it like that. But yeah, there's definitely ethical issues, and it's one of those things. No matter who we're dealing with, who we're talking to, we always have ethics approvals as part of our processes, and kind of just really thinking it through, because it's a minefield about making sure that people take the messages on without being absolutely petrified. We don't want people to live in fear. That's not at all what we want. We want them.
Oh, sorry.
No, we don't want. Yeah, we just want them to be kind of like be moved enough to kind of want to take it on board. But not to be, digging those kind of barrages in their garden where they're preparing for the nuclear risk coming.
So I'm really interested in where society, where power is in society, right? And I feel like when it comes to risk assessment, oftentimes it's left up to academics and to a select few politicians, and people who have the privilege to sit back and think about these very theoretical things and think about how they translate into reality. But I think one of my concerns is if we're going to effectively communicate to the general public, right? How much of a barrier do you think the fact that, I mean, at least here in the US, as someone who comes from a working class family, I can personally attest to this. When people get home from working 9 hours at a minimum wage job, they don't have the mental energy and oftentimes the emotional capacity, even, which that's not to, sound enfeebling. These people oftentimes have a lot more strength than we oftentimes give people generally the ability to believe. But like, how are we going to communicate these risks in a way that creates and spurs action when so much of the population doesn't have the luxury of time?
Yeah, for sure. And there are some things that we're already doing for this. Again,
Really?
my kind of experience in disaster science, and one of probably the most effective ways to do that is through children. They are just the most powerful kind of mechanism for us. One, for the kind of academic community, they're really accessible. They're, we can go into schools and we can do outreach and we can do those kinds of engagements. And there's this kind of like research bank that says that if you start to educate children, they go home and they share that news with their parents. And you kind of think about it. You used to go home and say, "Oh, Mum, I learned about the ancient Egyptians today, and don't you know they used to mummify cats?" And it's the same thing, that's exactly what happens. And actually, it's a technique that Mongolia used in the COVID response, and they did a lot of education on the children level. And then they all went home and told their families, and that was what they relied on in terms of the communication, which was as
Really? That's
effective. Yeah.
fascinating.
So this is one technique, which is why we focus a lot of our efforts on educating children and doing outreach with children, because it's extremely effective. I forgot where I was going with this. I don't know, really good point.
I mean, yeah, it just, for me, it seems like the societal condition that we're currently in, where majority of the wealth is kind of focused at the top, and that inequality creates a lack of action and lack of ability to actually intercept and talk about these ideas for the working class.
Yeah, so that was I think that was the other thing I was going to say, is that another part of my kind of background into games has been super fascinating. Sorry, I lost my thread and I'm back.
It's totally okay. Totally okay.
Which is one of the reasons that we started using games and these kind of engaging medias is their ability to do stealth learning. So this is a concept that I absolutely love, right? So cast your mind back to a time when you've played a video. Well, so here's my example. I'm going to start again. Here's my example. My partner is French, and he used to play a lot of games when he was younger. And so obviously in conversation, we speak in English, but I was one day very astounded by his incredible use of medieval language of kind of weapon systems. I was like, what's going on? And it's all from his use of playing Age of Empires. And the fact that he was used to hearing these terms and seeing them in context. And so it's this kind of vision of stealth learning. And I have another brilliant example of this, which is I was doing some outreach with some children in a school, and they were really, really young. And it was about rocks and fossils, and we had lots of different rocks around. And this little boy came running over to me and said, "I know what this is. I know what this is. It's obsidian." And I said, "That's amazing. How do you know that? You're so young." And he said, "Minecraft." And it's this kind of aspect of stuff learning. You don't even realize you're doing it, and we're able to use. Well, I mean, it's a kind of early science, but it's something I really love, and I'm really passionate about doing this kind of sneaky route in to kind of get you to think about these issues. And that's where this whole kind of genre of creative communications and all of this brilliant stuff that's going on. We're using so many different mediums, so many different methods and tools to communicate, which is just super exciting. I've seen puppet shows in local communities of children. Like I could talk to you all day about gaming, and universal paper clips it's been taking up a bit of my life recently, but it's an incredible game, and if you haven't played it, you have to try.
I've
This
not.
is making a paperclip and using AI systems and AI risk, and it's just brilliant. And you don't even realize you're learning these things. And so there are so many examples of creative communication that I could just talk to you all day about. I think that it is you can do these things, but they still need to have a plan. You can't just be like, "Oh, I'm just going to do this game and it's going to work." It has to be underpinned and embedded with pedagogy, and it has to be really thought about that learning cycle and understanding how that influences somebody, and they take it in as a message.
Yeah, which again is the ethical necessity to make sure the way that we're communicating is actually effective, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah.
And I feel like the really striking thing about stealth learning that I like a lot is it's a much more it overcomes two issues that you've alluded to and brought up so far, which is the dogma and ideology problem of what risks communication contends with what people in other spheres of their life believe politically or otherwise or religiously. Then also the problem of attention. Our attention today in the 21st century is very split between multiple things, right? Whether it's a dog with a chew toy or Instagram going off, there's a whole lot of different reasons for splintered attention. I feel like risk communication, it's a thing that requires mental effort over a period of time to really take away a lot of the lessons. And it sounds what a lot of effective communication is how can we package this information in such a way that minimizes the amount of time for the most amount of impact and most amount of takeaway. And I feel like a lot of what drives that necessity is the fact that we're so impeded by this constant fix for our attention, right? So it's like how, I just feel like that's a massive challenge you guys are up against.
Yeah, the constant bombardment of information that we have. It's like we live in a different way than, generations before us. We are constantly attached to our phones and media and news coming towards us. And constantly we're trying to find that time. And maybe COVID is the first time in our lives that we've actually stopped and had very little to do. And losing that whole kind of social side. So yeah, it's been a real wake-up call for that. But actually, it's how do we contend with these messages there's all of this news coming towards you, and there's this infodemic, as it's used so well now. And there's kind of misinformation, and it's understanding how we can wade through what's realistic, what's true pure information. So it is definitely a challenge. And I think this is where a lot of what we kind of do is it's this model of understanding what you want to communicate, who you want to communicate to, and how best to do it. So the more that it's tailored and understood in the kind of process, the more likely you are to kind of wade through and have people actually engage. But it's all about having those voices too that people want to hear, and the stories that people want to read, and that's why it can't all be doom and gloom, because no one will read it.
Which I think is so brilliant about your work when it comes to innovative communication, right? It's risk communication has to, it has to figure out new and novel ways to communicate these things, because the rest of everything else being communicated to these people are on all these new ways.
So it's all about how communicating, the more creative, the more engaging it is, the more people are likely to engage, actually want to be there and actually want to hear your messages. And so I think it's really exciting, all of this new stuff coming out. I would say probably we've seen some really effective messages. Well, I'll hold out on the jury of really effectiveness, but so one of the biggest probably examples of creative methods of communication within X risk is the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and the Doomsday Clock.
Yeah.
And you probably never thought of it as that method, but actually, yeah, it's a really engaging communication tool. It's been around since the 1940s. Post-war, it's kind of evolved out of that kind of the kind of ending of World War II. And so basically, what's really great about it is it's this group of really well-respected people. It's supported by the likes of Ban Ki-moon and Mary Robinson, and these really influential people that we really want to hear their voices. And they're kind of advocating towards like nuclear deterrence, and now they also have climate change and technological advancements on their kind of agenda. And they have this clock, the Doomsday Clock, which ticks closer and closer to midnight, and that midnight representing apocalypse. Although, it may not be mathematical, it's an artistic piece that is used to communicate this message. They do this, they sit every year and they have this discussion over the state of the world and kind of how it looks in terms of nuclear arms and infodemics. And then they decide where to set this hand on the clock. And we're now the closest it's ever been to midnight, 100 seconds to midnight, which is terrifying. I find that absolutely terrifying. There's a group of people that I really trust their voices that are saying to us with evidence that this is where we are. And we really think you now need to take this seriously. It has phenomenal reach. It gets, caught up in the media and the press all over the world. But what does it do? And that's something I'm really desperate to find out. It goes everywhere. But a year later comes and the clock ticks again. And in that meantime, what's happened and what has changed as a result of us communicating through this technique. And so It's brilliant. And I love the clock, but I'm dying to know what kind of weight it has in terms of pushing towards the right audiences. And so
I really want to know too. Yeah.
Well, there you go. We should work on it together.
That would be so much fun.
It is, I would say still, and I don't think we have anything else that comes close, the greatest tool we have in our field at the moment for communicating about existential risk. We've got some really inventive and creative things coming, but we're still a new field, we're still a new domain, and we're still developing and understanding what these risks are, and now we're only starting to think about how to communicate them well. So it's really exciting. We've got lots to draw from other different fields. I'm really excited for where this goes kind of from here and seeing what kind of comes out of it.
We're certainly in a renaissance of risk communication as well as just risks generally, which I think is... I am tremendously excited for the future of existential risk and global catastrophic risk as a field, right? It's funny, at my university, there's not a single professor. I've emailed probably 40 different professors trying to see if anyone knows about existential risk and global risk assessment. And just a couple in the philosophy department, which is my home department, have a sense of it. And apart from that, there's some who study climate change and some who study technology and society. But there's no unification of all those different disciplines. And I think a really big project, speaking of, getting the communication happening when people are still in education, and growing up, I feel like communicating to college students, at least for me personally, is going to be a really big part of my next couple of years at university. Is like, how do I get these clubs and how do I effectively communicate the importance of understanding existential risk to get people to join an existential risk club, or to get people to, petition to hire a researcher for it. These sort of pushes that happen on the small community level. I feel like it's going to be absolutely essential. So, and it comes down to conversations like this. So I want to thank you very, very much for coming on. And we're going to move very quickly to a couple rapid fire questions we have, or I have, excuse me. For some reason, I always use the we. I don't know why. But the first rapid fire question is, are you hopeful about the future of humanity, our future? Very, very light reading material
just
here.
Just a short, quick fire
very
question.
Short, quick.
On my optimistic side, yes, I would like to think that we have it within us to want better, to this kind of altruistic thinking. Yeah, I really, really hope so. I think, yeah, it's, that's an obvious kind of thing. On my pessimistic side, I think we're our own worst enemy, and we just proliferate our vulnerabilities. And until we kind of stop for a second and say, realize the kind of where we are, where we are, what we need to do to protect ourselves, perhaps it's more pessimistic, but I would like to be really optimistic, and we've got some really great people thinking about these issues and advocating for change. So yeah, I'm on the optimistic side.
I thank you so much for the answer. The proliferation of our vulnerability, that's a fantastic idea. And then I mean, depressing idea, but great and articulate nonetheless. My next question is, what is a book within your field as well as a book, so two books, a book within your field and then a book outside, not connected, that has personally impacted you and your journey?
So obviously the first book I ever read in Existential Risk, and my kind of introduction, was Our Final Century by Martin Rees, and obviously he's the founder of our centre. So for me, this was a bit of a game changer, and I was really...
It's so good.
So brilliant, and we're really
Yeah.
excited. We've got our conference coming up this year, and we're hoping to kind of remake a new edit of it for kind of as a result of the conference. So it's really, really exciting, and for me, like, really kind of cemented a lot of the key ideas and was just really profound. So absolutely, if someone's like really looking to kind of introduce themselves to our field in an impactful way, anything by Martin Rees is a really good way to go. In terms of outside of the field, things that have impacted me, it's a deep question. Am I allowed to choose non-fiction?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Then I would say probably, there's so many. I'm going to say Cloud Atlas, and I'm going to just say that it's such a brilliant story, and it kind of has those links to existential risk that get you thinking about it in a different way. It's really engaging, and just obviously lots of people might just want to get the film, but yeah, I'd say that.
That's great. And then our last question of today's podcast is describe your best friend.
My best friend.
Yeah, describe your best friend.
My best friend is probably. Am I allowed to use my dog?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, please. That would be wonderful, actually.
Okay, well, my best friend is my Hungarian this little in America. He is good fun. He is sensitive. Yeah, we have lots of lovely walks together. He doesn't think about the end of humanity. It makes me smile after a long day in the office thinking about these crazy things. So if I'm allowed that, then definitely my Hungarian Vista. His name is Moby. He actually has an Instagram if you want to follow him. He's at Moby_Visla, or Vishla if you're American.
Well, I will definitely look him. We're a massive Vishla household, so that sounds absolutely wonderful. I've not had anyone answer their dog yet. That's amazing. I mean, it makes sense. It makes total sense. Their ignorance is beautiful in a way that could never happen with humans.
I just hope none of my actual human friends listen to this and then realize that all of them.
They're like, damn, if only I was less aware of global issues. But thank you very much for coming on the vlog. It was a really, really fun talk.
No worries. I really, really enjoyed it.
I'm excited.
Yeah, make sure you will keep in touch, or if you want to chat with me, just I'm really happy to chat all things communication wherever you are in the world.
I would absolutely love to have you on at some point in the future again. This was a really fun conversation, very enlightening.
Thanks very much.